Chris, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us for the Tungsten launch event. We've discussed platform risk many times before, and one of the big challenges of the modern internet ecosystem is that once tech companies reach a certain size, there's a tendency for them to stop innovating and restrict access to user data and relationships that they shared during their explosive growth phase, and then squeeze everyone in the mode of a monopoly. And this can be really harmful for the ecosystem. For example, there are a ton of startups incorporating professional profiles from LinkedIn into their own services, and then LinkedIn revoked everyone's API access. Can you give us some of your perspective on platform risk through the history of tech?
Yeah, so I think to start off, I'd say the core dynamic in technology, right, is you have platforms. So that could be something like an iPhone or an Android, or in the old days like Windows, or it could be a social network like Facebook or Twitter, or a browser like in the past Netscape, and today something like Chrome, and then applications built on top, right? So that's in the Windows era, that was Quicken and Microsoft's products like Word. In the social era, there were like Twitter clients, for example, like Tweety and TweetDeck, and Facebook had games like Zynga. The iPhone obviously has Uber and Instagram and all sorts of this rich app ecosystem. And so one of the reasons tech is so exciting is that you have this interplay between the applications and infrastructure, right? Someone like Apple invents an iPhone, then you have new applications, and those things create kind of a reinforcing feedback loop. And when those things really hit, if you look at the growth rates, they really like exponentially grow in their growth period. So like for the iPhone as an example, it was between 2008 and like 15, it just like explosively grew. And then if you look at the numbers, at some point it saturates, and that's what's known as the S curve, right? So it sort of goes it starts off, and it's called S curve because it starts off, it's sort of hitting product market fit, then boom, it hits, it shoots up. There's some period of, let's call it 5 to 10 years where it grows rapidly. Facebook, their growth period was like 2006 through 13-ish or something is when it really skyrocketed. And then as you said, like at some point it kind of hits a saturation point. And I think we're seeing that, for example, the iPhone is the most obvious example today. We're just in the news last week, is the iOS store's practices. So Apple's iPhones have basically leveled out at roughly 1 billion devices, growing slightly, but not much. If you follow their kind of earnings reports, it's all about kind of services now, right? Which is their 30% take rate. And so they do a couple things. They have this huge kind of monopolistic position, and then they require all applications go through the App Store. You don't have a choice. And then they require, if you do go through the store, in many circumstances, you have to give them 30% of your revenue. Some big companies like Netflix and Amazon, if you notice, you can't buy Netflix or Amazon books in the on the Apple iPhone itself. You have to go to the browser or to a desktop. They sort of do that to get around things. There's this sort of cat and mouse game. Companies like Netflix and Amazon are big enough to really kind of fight off Apple. Startups aren't. And so this idea of sort of platform risk is this concept that if you're an entrepreneur or an investor in startups, is a huge existential risk that kind of looms over. It's this cloud that looms over all software development, essentially, is that at some point, if you're successful, the big guy that you're dependent on will come and kind of extract rents, right? It's and in worst case, in some cases, it's much worse. Like in the case of Zynga, Facebook just kind of changed all the rules that just kind of destroyed the economics. Twitter changed their API that just literally killed off overnight like a huge swath of startups, like Twitter clients and things that depend on an API. Microsoft very famously, went hard after they either tried to buy or build and put out of business all of their kind of main dependencies. There's books written about them taking on Quicken with Microsoft money and things. Famously Netscape and IE bundling that went to antitrust. So it's a huge issue, and I think really stifles. My view is it really stifles innovation. It stifles startups. When you don't have it. So for example, the web initially did. One of the beautiful things about the web is it was built on open protocol, so you didn't have that platform risk. The web wasn't going to change the rules on you if you built and YouTube or Facebook or Google. And of course, look what happened. You had this incredible period of innovation, right, where all these people, entrepreneurs, were willing to build these things, and investors invest in them, and decades of kind of investment went into them. And part of why all that investment went in, both in terms of time and money, was people knew that if you built something on the web, you could keep it, right? It's kind of like, one of the reasons the United States has been such a fertile economy is that, if you build something in the United States, you can you have taxes and there's all sorts of things you have to do to give back to society, but in the end, you generally get to keep it. Whereas if you go to like an authoritarian country, where they, famously seize assets and things, you just see far less investment in those countries. It's sort of analogous to that. So it's a huge, huge issue. One of the really exciting things with blockchains is that we're now, as we call it, kind of entering the Web3 era, where we think you can get the combination of kind of the advanced functionality of Web 2, all the richness and reasons why people love Twitter and Facebook and Gmail and all these other kind of modern applications, but the openness of Web 1, the lack of platform risk. Startups can really build on things. And obviously, that's kind of the kind of thing you're building at Definity, is that kind of infrastructure where you can build that advanced functionality and not make trade-offs, because the early web is limited in its functionality, but have the lack of platform risk that was associated with so much innovation in the first year of the web.
Yeah, I think there's an analogy there. The internet provided, it removed platform risk for connectivity. It provided a global public network to which anyone could connect services. And supply services without fear that their connection to the internet would be degraded or taken away from them by some centralized controlling party, because the internet is decentralized. But the internet only does this for connectivity. And the internet computer aims to extend that to compute, so that in addition to providing a open free market where people can connect services, we can also enable people to build services that others can build on, free of platform risk too.
To your point, there was a point in 2000, I would say 8 or so, having been there, I was an entrepreneur back then, when there were real competitors to proprietary social networks. So RSS and all the related protocols were essentially open alternatives where you could follow friends and follow blogs and do other things. But they really got obviously crushed by the proprietary versions. And a big part of it was you couldn't do certain things. For example, you couldn't store, if I'm C. Dixon on Twitter, I can go to Twitter and sign up and be C. Dixon, and I can follow you on Twitter, and that's all just stored magically in the cloud from a user perspective. With RSS and things, you had to do all of these, you had to create a website and put this markup language on your website that showed your friends list. There was no place on the web, there's DNS kind of, which is a limited storage thing, but web had no storage mechanism, as an example, right? Which is, obviously in the system you're building, a key part of it is this kind of feeling you can just put stuff right in the cloud, my name and my friend list, and the internet computer will just figure out how to store it, right?
That's right. You can actually store data within the protocol, within the internet. So you don't need to put it on a proprietary platform like AWS, or necessarily within a social network, say like Facebook. Somebody can build an open internet service into which users can put their data, and upon which other companies or enterprises or open internet services can build, because they're guaranteed access through the APIs that are provided, won't be revoked.
A question for you then would be, what if a cynical person says, how do I know there won't be change? How do I know Definity won't become evil? How do I know the application developer on top won't become evil? What protects me? How do I know this isn't the same thing over again that happened 10 years ago, the kind of bait and switch of the internet services that promised to be owned by users? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think that, it boils down to the magic of blockchain technology, and having multiple parties running a platform via ultimately a consensus protocol that protects the users of the platform from the sort of faulty or malicious behavior of any individual participant. And ultimately, the internet computer is designed in such a way that if somebody creates a permanent API, even if let's say, you have an open internet service, an open social network, say, that has a tokenized governance system, first of all, the platform won't allow you to remove an API that's been marked as permanent. But not only that, the framework has mechanisms that allow degradations of functionality behind an API to be reversed.
And it's baked into the logic of the system, as opposed to, and not everyone, of course, will be sophisticated enough to go and personally audit that system, but it's all open, and therefore anyone can go and audit it, and you can, as a user or a developer, know that you could always go in, read the code, look at the system, and have your guarantees promised by kind of math and software, as opposed to corporate commitments or legal commitments or other kinds of things that we relied on in the past. I think it's what we're talking about. We're talking about from the developer perspective, is also the user perspective, right? Which is the way I think about it is I think one reason people are kind of unhappy with the state of social networking today is a couple of things, or marketplaces like Uber and other kinds of services like this. A couple of things. Like one is they feel, or Airbnb, or just generally like kind of Web 2 products, is I think one is some of the users feel like they helped build these services and yet they didn't get to participate in the economics of them. Two, they feel like the platforms implicitly made commitments to them. Like Twitter said, hey, this is an open place to tweet, and now suddenly they're kicking people off, changing the rules, changing the terms of service. So I would put those two into two buckets, right? Economics and governance. Another advantage of blockchains, in addition to making commitments to developers about APIs, permanence, things like that, like you're describing, it can also make commitments to users. So it can say to users, hey, you get some of the tokens for using this, or you can buy the tokens, or you can earn the tokens, and you get certain governance rights, and we can't change those. We're making those commitments to you in the code, and they're permanent commitments in the same way. So there's I think of it as a set of commitments to developers, which enables innovation, and then a set of commitments to users, which enables kind of good behavior on the part of platforms.
That's right. I think, entrepreneurs are faced with a number of fundamental problems that open internet services can help them address. The first problem is fundraising, and tokenized governance systems provide a route towards fundraising through ICOs 2.0. Secondly, they provide a way of getting over the chasm, getting your first users through incentivizing user participation. And then I think the last piece of the equation goes back to platform risk. Big tech succeeds because it benefits from immense network effects derived from all of the user data and relationships that it's hijacked. And if you want to compete with big tech, you yourself need better network effects. Now, token economics are one of the ways you can do that. Another way is by creating non-revocable, trustless APIs and getting other entrepreneurs to build on them and extend out, create a richer ecosystem around your service.
Yeah, I think we saw that. Email is a good example. That's another open protocol where there was a huge problem, probably peaking in the early 2000s, of spam on the email. And if you go back and look at it, there were news articles saying it's going to destroy email. Very similar to like people talking about bots today on Twitter and Russian bots and all this other kind of talk. What happened with email was, because it was an open protocol, you had lots of capitalistic for-profit companies that created anti-spam companies. So there was I was an entrepreneur back then. It was Brightmail and Postini, and Google ended up buying Postini. But there's a whole rich, probably 50 companies funded by VCs and started by entrepreneurs that tried to solve the anti-spam problem, the spam problem, and they kind of did. It's still an annoyance, but I think most people would say spam has been greatly reduced, and you let the market do that, right? And right now, a company like Twitter just can't do that. They have to solve these problems themselves, because we would never fund, or smart entrepreneurs would never build something on a platform like that, knowing the platform risk. And as a result, they have to do everything themselves, and you don't get the kind of the benefit of the marketplace solving these problems in the way that you did with open protocols. So that's just, I think one thing people are often confused by. I think open protocols is like kumbaya, socialist. Everyone should hold hands and be friends. It's not at all. I think it's the opposite. It's the thing that unlocks kind of self-interested capitalism, which is a very powerful force for solving problems. So you're the founder and chief scientist of Definity. You've been working on this for a long time, and I think now with the Tungsten launch, you're approaching kind of you're now opening it up to more people, and in the near future we'll be launching the kind of production mainnet. Can you tell us, how is Definity better than other blockchains? One thing obviously is it has a different approach to scaling. Can you talk about that? And then after that, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the applications you're excited to see built on top.
Definity was always technology first. We were fortunate to raise a lot of funds, and we said, we're going to build this NASA for decentralization. We're going to build out a major R&D organization. And we've done that. We've got this absolutely incredible team, research centers in several countries, and we've been, full steam ahead, developing what we believe is blockchain of the future.
Can you tell us a little bit about the team?
Yeah, so we've got probably one of the world's strongest cryptography teams within the Definity Foundation. And that has been a huge enabler for us with respect to solving certain key problems. So, many years ago, I articulated how things like threshold relay could be used, how we could apply advanced cryptography to create, for example, an unstoppable, unmanipulable stream of random numbers, and how that stream of random numbers could be used to drive a blockchain using something called probabilistic slot consensus. The challenges, though, involve a lot of the supporting infrastructure within the protocol. So you need things like DKGs to set up the cryptography, among many other things. When you drill down into the technicals of a blockchain built the way Definity is, it starts to get very complex indeed. And it's probably fair to say that when you move away from a sort of basic proof of work blockchain in the direction of something driven using advanced cryptography, the complexity increases exponentially. So our approach to address that was, just hire all of the world's best talent that we could get and build out our sort of R&D infrastructure, which we've done through, creating research centers and remote teams and so on.
With a blockchain computer like this, there's the cryptography side. There's also, that's the kind of consensus layer. There's also, you have to, for example, have your own, kind of programming environment, kind of networking layer. There's just a whole bunch of different, just similar to, to an iPhone, right? There's the chips and the OS and just like a whole bunch of different layers you got to build out, right?
Our approach to this is reductionist. So the internet computer can be thought of as a seamless universe for software. That works in a different way to the software most people are familiar with. For example, persistence happens automatically. You just write code, and you don't need a database or a file system to persist your data. And that's because the internet computer actually persists the memory pages in which the software runs. So, it was a huge effort. Obviously, you can go as deep as you like. We're very tightly integrated with things like WebAssembly. But, we've created a platform that we think is transformational. And we've aimed to extend the internet so the internet becomes the platform upon which we build, as well as the network that connects us all. The internet computer provides a unique opportunity for entrepreneurs. They can build the next generation of internet services in the form of open internet services, and they can leverage all kinds of things you can only get on a blockchain. Tokenization to raise money, tokenization to create incentives for early users, and non-revocable APIs so they can leverage service composability and collaboratively build out the proposition with other entrepreneurs. What kind of things are you looking for in entrepreneurs and projects building on platforms like the internet computer?
My view is when you have kind of radical new technology, so let's take the mobile phone as an example, you really have, I think you have innovations that are built on top of them that fall into two categories. So you have things which you simply couldn't have done before, and things which you could do before, but now you can do better, okay? And so a mobile phone, what could you simply, like before the mobile phone, like the idea of having a Instagram where you take a photo, or Snapchat, you take a photo and send it to your friend, and like it just wouldn't have made sense on a desktop computer, like you just couldn't have had it. Or Uber and Lyft, right? You needed a mobile phone because you had to have the mobile phone in the car for the driver, so it just simply couldn't have existed. And then you have stuff like Facebook and Twitter, which actually did exist very much on the desktop, right? But they're just better. They're with you all the time. They're, et cetera. So they're sort of, or Amazon for that matter, right? It existed perfectly fine without the phone, but now it's on the phone, and now you can just reach for your phone and buy something, and it's even easier. And so it's similar with blockchain. So there's things that couldn't exist before, and I think some of those are, to me, those are some of the most fascinating things. Like, for example, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, so like MakerDAO and Compound, and there's a bunch of these really interesting new kind of experiments, which are startups that are literally kind of these organizations that are code, and after the entrepreneurs build them and launch them, they're really owned by the community and governed by the community. And it's sort of this really interesting kind of crowdsourcing that we saw applied to Wikipedia for creating information, and to one of the powers of the internet is bringing the crowd together, right? And the crowd can create an encyclopedia. That was an awesome invention last decade. This invention, we're seeing crowds create these kind of virtual organizations that have various functions. That's a brand new idea. It couldn't exist before blockchain. It's really exciting. But there's things that we could do before. So we could do social networks before, but now we can do them, or we could do ride sharing marketplaces or things. But now we can do them where the users own part of the network, and where the users govern the network, and the rules for who's platformed and deplatformed and what's acceptable practices and everything else, it can be governed by the community. So I think both are really exciting. I think what tends to happen with new things is the first phase, people kind of rebuild things that already existed in new ways, and it takes time. Like the web is a good example of this. If you look at the 90s, most of the first wave of the web was people just kind of taking things that already existed, like magazines, and putting them on a website. So you go to a hotel website or something, or whatever, New York Times. And then the second wave was, wait, this is more than just internet magazines, right? You can do two-way communication, like YouTube and user-generated stuff. That was the 2000s were the era of YouTube and Facebook and Wikipedia. And so it may be like that with blockchains, like kind of the first wave, you have stable coins and lending platforms and things that are not that radical, but get people kind of used to it. But then over time, you get the really kind of interesting, crazy new stuff. I always love the really interesting, crazy stuff, but it takes time sometimes. But I just think watching that whole evolution is always so exciting when you have this kind of new creative medium upon which developers can build. And they kind of, people are running around and trying to figure out what to do with it. And I think we're about to enter that phase with your launch and just a lot of the innovation generally happening. I think we're about to enter that really creative phase, and that's really exciting.
In a sense, autonomous software was never possible before, so everything that's built using autonomous software is new. Yeah,
then you use the phrase autonomous. We should explain that. I think it's a great phrase. It's not, it's sort of similar to smart. I think it's a better phrase than smart contracts. But the idea is that one of the cool things with blockchains is you write the code, and then the code will continue to persist and run as designed, even if the intentions of the creator change. The code is autonomous in that sense. It's a great word for it, and it really is a new concept. It's why you can trust that software, right? Because you don't have to trust the people behind it. If you write some autonomous software in Definity that says I'm only going to have 21 million coins, like the way Bitcoin does, you can trust that the code will keep that commitment, even if Chris Dixon or Dom or someone else becomes evil, right? Like they can't change the rules even if they want to.
One of the most important lessons I've learned in my career as an entrepreneur is that you always want to catch a wave. It's far easier surfing in than paddling out. You don't want to be trying to create a space. You want to be creating something in a space that's rapidly expanding and catch the wave. How do you think this applies to entrepreneurs looking at the decentralization and open computing space today?
We're still early. There's still a ton of opportunity. I think if I had to compare it to, let's say, mobile phones, the most recent kind of massive wave, you had the iPhone came out in 2007, the App Store in 2008, and then probably 2009 through 12 was actually, if you look back, that was the period of Instagram, Uber, Lyft, all of the kind of the huge iPhone apps. I think, Definity is trying to be the iPhone. We are pre-iPhone in the blockchain space right now. I believe we're 2005 or 6 to mobile phones, which means that the vast majority, which means 2005 or 6, there was BlackBerry, there was Sidekick, there were a bunch of very successful application developers building mobile apps, but the real action started afterwards, and I think that's where we are now, and I think there's a ton of opportunity, and I agree with you that it's entrepreneurship is so much about catching waves, and there's a lot of waves happening in the world. There's AI, there's the kind of SaaS and cloud and all the other kinds of things, but to me, this is the one that when you kind of look back on every decade in tech, there's kind of one thing that really dominated, and I think this will be the one in this next decade, is my feeling. But obviously, time will tell. But certainly not too late. It's very early, and there's a ton of opportunity. And if you're somebody who's thinking about where to start a company, I think you should really take a hard look at this space.
Yeah, because we're not only changing the platform on what you build, but we're changing what you can build it's a new kind of platform.
Right. Yeah, I think of it. My friend Balaji Srinivasan has this essay. He calls the idea maze, and he compares entrepreneurship to running through a maze and sort of running into dead ends and finding piles of gold. But what's where I think the analogy breaks down is what happens in technology is then new kind of enabling infrastructure comes along, which really like unlocks a new section of the maze. And that's what something like the blockchain, like what you guys are going to do is unlock a whole new maze, and then you get this whole like 5-year period of people running around exploring it. You can still go, and there's plenty of cloud opportunity, but you're running around a maze. A lot of people have run around for the last 10 years, and so you got to be kind of clever and find this little passage over here or something. Whereas here, it's just like a big, fresh, juicy new maze, and so I think I always like that metaphor and think it's pretty accurate. And yeah, so that's one of the really exciting things about to happen.
And how long do you think this next wave of technology is going to last until it's completely established itself and everyone's building on the open internet?
That's a good question. I think with these really big, I think it's huge. What you're asking is probably the most important question of. You could argue it's the important question of the 21st century is just sort of what's the role of the internet, right? I mean, we see this happening in politics, in economics. Like the internet's just this incredibly important invention, And there's sort of two broad views. Like one, I think, is that it's already built out, and now it's kind of like. And this by the way affects like these regulatory questions. Like a lot of people think like, hey, it's built out. There's 4 winners. It's Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, whatever, and it's like TV channels. And now the government should come in and regulate them. My view would be it's software. It's much different than hardware in that software is much more malleable and a much richer design space, and there's a lot more room for entrepreneurship and creativity and sort of big shifts in paradigms and things like this. And I think we're early in it. I think we're it's like the automobile revolution and we're in 1915 or something, and like we still got another 80 years of like interesting stuff to happen, or electricity or something. It depends on which historical analogy you prefer, but I think we're really early in it. I think this is the most important blockchains and kind of all of this kind of rich internet infrastructure kind of is the most important thing happening in it, and I think it will take many decades to play out. That said, I think that if you're an entrepreneur, you can have interesting products that reach scale and have good financial outcomes and good societal outcomes. I think it'll over the next 5 to 10 years, so more in the near term, but I think it'll also play out longer. Kind of similar to the web or something. Like you had a lot of interesting opportunities in the 90s and 2000s, and you still do, right? It's a huge space.
So how long for a decentralized Uber to overtake Uber?
For these things to really get to scale, you look at a lot of these internet services today, they're at billions of users. If you look at like a WhatsApp, so it probably takes a decade or something, but along the way you can have very big, impactful services, right?
Yeah.
And so we haven't talked yet about the sort of enterprise angle here. How do you see enterprises, big companies, who want to get involved here? Like what do you see their role in the next couple of years? It's
going to be a surprise, and enterprises are going to want to build on the internet. There are a number of reasons. The first is all of them are sick of captive customer games. Today they build on this huge stack with hundreds or thousands of vendors, and all of them are trying to make captive customers. And even if they're not, even if you're using an open source product, it's very easy to get locked in. So that's the first reason that enterprises will prefer to build on the internet. The second one is that the internet computer environment greatly simplifies the process of developing systems. The third one is that these systems that you build are secure by default. So on the internet computer, people create systems and services by uploading these interoperable compute units called software canisters. Software canisters run with all of the security guarantees of smart contracts. The internet computer itself is a tamper-proof environment. You don't need firewalls to protect it, and no one can hack in and find a back door and start subverting your system. So we're seeing an acceleration in the number of major security fails, and hackers are moving on from just stealing PII to actually installing ransomware on people's systems that encrypt all your server instances, and you have to pay Bitcoin or something to decrypt them and get your systems back online. So we've met with a lot of local governments and corporations already that are very interested in finding ways to build tamper-proof systems. Lastly, we actually think many enterprises will start to use the autonomous software features that the Internet Computer supports. So that means they'll build their own systems in autonomous form and then use governance systems to control the updating of them for security purposes. We also think that a lot of enterprise services like Salesforce will be reinvented in open form. So, we foresee an open internet service that provides Salesforce functionality that is, collaboratively updated and developed by systems integrators and business consultancies around the world, and that open Salesforce will provide a far better deal for most enterprises. So I think enterprise will also shift to using open internet services in the coming years too. Okay, I guess it's time to finish up. Chris, thank you so much for joining our Tungsten launch event. We super look forward to continuing to work with Andreessen Horowitz to build out the internet ecosystem. Thanks again.